Welcome to the Fitness Stuff for Normal People podcast. I am Tony. This is Marianna over here. And it's no secret, the fitness industry sucks, period. Whether it's the corrupt multi-billion-dollar supplement and weight loss industry or the endless supply of influencers promoting anything to drive page views or put a dollar in their pocket. The bottom line is we're not just trying to provide another fitness podcast, but actually change the fitness industry for the better by providing you with the knowledge and tools to give you the confidence in applying the best possible training, nutrition, supplementation, and habits into your own life. Where today, we're talking a little bit about some fire and ice, right? Cold and heat therapy in the form of ice baths and saunas, which I don't know about you, but as of the last couple months in either my Q&As or videos I get tagged on, it's overwhelmingly increasing the desire to learn about ice baths and saunas, but more ice baths. I don't know about you. It's like the new veganism. You got to blame Andrew Huberman. But that's always his fault. But the idea of heat and cold therapy revolves around the concept called adaptive thermogenesis, which we're going to learn about more today. And these adaptations inside the body are being looked at in regards of health benefits like increasing your life and health span, increasing your metabolic rate and better fat loss, better recovery and performance, even boosting anabolic hormones like testosterone and growth hormone, along with some massive cognition benefits that are claimed. And today we're actually going to look in and dissect each of those to see which ones hold weight, which ones are real, which ones are worth experimenting with, and which ones just aren't.
I'm excited. But before we get started, a few ways you can support us that we really appreciate. Some 5-star reviews. I think we're at 1,500 on Spotify. We have a 4.9 rating, but all feedback is good feedback. So we just appreciate the review in general. You can go.
The one under 5-star was probably just an accident.
It slipped.
Probably a typo.
But yeah, you could do that on Spotify, Apple, and it's one of the easiest ways you can quickly support us so that we can continue to reach as many people as possible. I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoyed being in person, recording with Tony, and that literally would not be possible without all of you. So we really appreciate it. And the next thing you could do, if you really like the research aspect that we bring into each episode, make sure you join us on our premium membership in the weekly Fitness Stuff Research Review, where we dive even deeper into specific studies addressing individual nuances, showing you how to apply each aspect into your own specific lifestyle, while teaching you more about how to read and interpret research. We have great things over there like monthly AMA episodes, which is our Ask Me Anything, exclusive partnership deals with Merrick Health, Examine, your own private podcast and research review feed, and so much more. The first month is just $5 if you want to check it out. Can't wait to see you over there. The link will be in our show notes below.
Every single week. Now, a quick word from our two sponsors. We talk about just how broken the supplement industry really, really is. And we had a conversation I think it was about a month and a half, 2 months ago, with the owner of Legion Athletics, Mike Matthews. And if you've been following and listening to our show for a long, long time, we only recommend a handful of different supplemental companies in regards to just how scientifically backed they are, how research forward they are. And Legion's always up there, along with Now, Thorne, bulk supplements, just a few, but Legion's always up there as well, since every single one of their supplements is third-party tested for purity, and their entire scientific review board made up of MDs, PhDs, and other professionals that every single supplement, article, and podcast they produce. So we want to give a special shout out to them as being a proud sponsor of the show. I know we hit heavy with the whey protein, their whey plus. We don't shut up about it because we can't stop taking it every single day.
I just made a new protein baked
oats
recipe on my Instagram if you want to go see it with their honey cereal.
I was going to say, Marianna's got me cooking. Marianna's got me cooking with whey protein. And the Legion mix super, super well with recipes.
But their plant protein is much better for microwaving. So I find it doesn't dry out if you're like doing some baked oats in the microwave or make like a protein mug cake in the microwave. Plant protein is way less drying because the whey absorbs whatever liquid really fast, which is great. It makes for a great creamy consistency, but it's much better baked. Plant is much better in the microwave. Little tip there.
Well, and their plant is made from rice and pea protein, which are two of the higher quality forms of plant protein if you want to go that route as well. And you can snag some of that or any of their other supplements, the pre-workouts, the creatine, the multis, anything they've got. You can use the link down in our bio below or the code FSPOD, FSPOD at checkout for 20% off your first order or double points after that. Now, this segues perfectly into our second partner, and that's why we actually adopted our second partner along, right? We don't just accept every single freaking person who reaches out to us. But if there's one thing we don't shut up about on this podcast, it's protein, because whatever your goal is, whether it's to lose fat, to lean out, to build muscle, to get stronger, or even just live a healthier, longer quality life, protein is always at the center of what you need to be focusing on.
I know I just mentioned plant protein, but one of our most commonly asked questions, without a doubt, is which type of protein should you choose? There's so many different types of proteins, and we all have personal preferences about taste, quantity, but we're partnering actually with the Strong Inside, which is an educational resource, not selling anything here, but they're just really here to help you learn more about proteins from milk, specifically whey protein, which I think is really fascinating, really cool. I love that more companies are trying to educate on this topic because it's really helpful. But if you didn't know already, whey protein is a protein derived from milk and tested as the highest quality form of protein. That's because it's a complete protein, meaning it contains all 9 essential amino acids and it's absorbed more quickly than other types of proteins. It's found not just in your basic whey protein powder, but also in protein bars, shakes. You could just look for whey protein concentrate, or whey protein isolate on labels, all which deliver a high protein content.
Yeah. And especially if you're increasing your protein intake just to make whatever goal you have easier, just look for those foods with whey. It's one of the easiest, quickest digested forms to help you do that. Now, today, more and more people are actually looking at the science and find a more evidence-based approach into finding the best protein from them. And the Strong Inside is on a mission to educate people about the benefits from the complete proteins that milk provides. Now, the next question of what type of protein is how much protein do you actually need on your personal goals? If you listen to the show, you know that every answer should be given with nuance, not just a simple slap over. Your goals, your gender, how old you are, your body composition, all these things go into it. And the Strong Inside actually has a pretty cool, easy to use protein calculator in stronginside.com or in our show notes down below, so you can help figure out a good window for whatever goal you have. Let's talk about it. Ice baths, saunas. Now, the idea of adaptive thermogenesis is where I want to start without going too deep into the science. And then we're going to start with ice baths and saunas, because I think that's where most of the hype is today. And then finish up with saunas, because they do have some overlapping benefits and mechanisms, but they both fall under the idea of adaptive thermogenesis. And essentially what that is like a lot of systems in the body, right? We like to stay at a good little baseline. The human body likes to maintain an internal temperature of about 98.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And that can vary a little bit by about 0.6 degrees in either direction. But I mean, anyone with a kid knows this, or if you've ever had a fever, when it goes too much above that, it knocks you out. So as bigger shifts in external temperature happen, your body has to make changes and offset things to maintain that internal body temperature as close to 98.2 as you can. I think the most common way we can all relate to is when you start to sweat when it gets hot outside. Everyone starts to sweat. That's the body's first line to kind of cool us down, right? It doesn't like to just flow with it. So that's essentially what the idea of adaptive thermogenesis is everything going on inside the body to keep us at this temperature. So that's where these kind of ideals fall in. Now let's talk about ice baths, which I know with our episode with Ben, you were our lovely filmer. You filmed us.
I didn't go in. I hate extreme temperatures. It is terrible for me. I hate feeling really, really cold and really, really hot. So no, thank you.
Yeah. And that was freaking cold. So we were at the Aloe house when Marianna came out to Southern California to film with all of us. And when we were in there, they've got those nice, like the $11,000 cold tubs. And one was 40 degrees, 45 degrees, and 50 degrees. And Ben and I had jumped in the cold baths. I want you to tell us, that felt like 5 minutes, but I would not be surprised if it was like a
little
minute.
over one. Yeah.
That was the longest minute of my life. But we did that right before. And I don't know if I've had that cold of a plunge before. I've swam in the Pacific Ocean. Is freezing cold if you haven't visited California. The ocean's not a fun place to be. It's freezing. And other cold bodies of water and cold showers, but nothing compared to that minute in the ice bath. And I was telling you when we first started recording, do you remember that? I was like, hey, I might say something stupid. My brain is
you took
jittery.
A while to I was on it though, but you were a little bit not, I don't know if that's.
I was unwell. Marianna was on point, thank God, but I was still in shock a little bit, I think is what it was, but it cracked me up. But that's what we did before. And it's kind of the new big thing now. The guy with the sign even saying like, hey, it's not the new veganism. You can do an ice bath without telling everyone that you're
everyone about it. Everyone needs to know. Yeah. Ugh.
It's the new hot thing. So let's talk about it, because you and I both, we spend time and we get tagged in a lot of videos and claims online. I feel like they're growing, the benefits really coming from ice baths. They're getting stronger and stronger and bigger from the people on social media, not in real life, but from social media. Do you feel like that too?
Yeah. And it honestly, like, it really does crack me up because it shows how not everyone, I'm not talking if you're just like jumping in to the ocean in the morning, go you. Like, you're built different if you could do that. But I'm talking about like these celebrities or influencers that just go and buy these tubs for their homes and have them on their roofs and like just talk about it like it's nothing. And it's just like, you're so out of touch with reality. $2,000 for a cold tub.
Yeah, I think the cheapest one, I finish each morning off with a cold shower. After my workout, everything like that,
yeah,
I like
too.
to finish with like a nice little cold shower because I love the way it makes me feel. And I was like, you know what, maybe I should look into like how much and I could not find a cheap ice bath unless like one that you don't need to constantly just be buying ice bags for, but one that keeps itself cold.
Yeah.
I don't think you can find one for under $4,000 to $6,000. And that's for one of the inflatable. And I think it's growing and growing because I keep seeing claims. One the other day, one of my clients even sent it to me. The guy's saying that its effect on the metabolism is better for fat loss than training 5 days a week for an hour at a time. Just 3 minutes of ice bath every day. And he's going through and it's got millions of views and shares. And it's like, pump the brakes a little bit. Yeah. It does affect our metabolism and we're going to talk about it. But to what degree and like really is it worth it is what we're trying to find out.
Yeah.
So this is more of a common method. This has been common among athletes for like decades.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, a nice bath after you work out.
NFL players are getting interviewed in the freaking bath. It's been around for decades. And mainly, I think the intention there is just to reduce soreness, swelling, and speed up recovery is why athletes would have been using this. Now, most research, I do want to point this out, is done in cold water therapy in the form of cold plunges or baths up to the neck. And I do think that's important to measure because I think a lot of people translate the benefits or the effects of those cold plunges to being the same exact thing as your cold shower in the morning for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. And those two things aren't the same. Yeah. Okay. Like the 40 to 50 degree Fahrenheit cold plunge where your body is completely submerged is not the same thing as like a 30-second rinse off in your shower, which might get down to like 60 degrees, maybe 55 if you live in like a colder climate. But showers just don't get as cold and it's not a full body immersion. So that's what most of the research is surrounding. And I honestly, I don't know about you. I should have probably ran this by you before putting together the outline. I left out cryotherapy just because that is the most out of range, out of touch thing. I think it's $60 to $100 per session.
Yeah. I don't care to talk about those. And it's mostly used because people do it because they want to be thin, like the cool sculpting, the cryotherapy. There's no evidence of any long-term benefit for either of them. Plot twist. Whoa, shocking. But like,
what?
I was actually just talking about that the other day that's so funny. So I get Botox in my jaw because I have TMJ. And so it helps with my grinding and my headaches. And I was just talking with my nurse practitioner who does it because he was like thinking about starting cryotherapy. And he can't get over how idiotic it is. And he follows me on Instagram and stuff. So he was like, I want you to talk about this. It's terrible. And
that's too funny.
I could make so much money off of it, but I would never do it.
Yeah, you can make so much money because it's a cold little chamber. But that's the thing too. Not because it's so out of reach financially, but you don't see any of the same effects from a cold plunge as you do spending time in the cryotherapy. The benefits don't transfer. There's no research supporting it. It just doesn't. So that's why we left it out of this session today. If you were wondering, because I think a lot of people still use it, their businesses out there. So if you do use cryotherapy, there's probably a much more cost-effective way for you to get what you're looking for than those $60 to $100 sessions.
Yeah.
Wherever you might be. Now, today, specifically, when people use ice baths, they're typically used between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit, anywhere between 1 and 10 minutes. I don't think, if you're telling me to sit 10 minutes in that 45-degree tub I think I was in at the Aloe House,
I don't think that would be healthy.
0% chance. Ben said he couldn't even feel his feet at the end of that 1 minute. I'm like, I don't think
Ben has a good poker face though.
He's just sitting there like a monk, like just chilling. And I'm just there like trying not to have a panic attack. Oh, okay, that was tough. Mine was 5 degrees colder though, so I do want to say that. Just kidding. Ben's just probably better at that than me. So we're going to look at this because the cold benefit claims usually are surrounding fat loss and metabolism, testosterone, which we're not going to spend too much time on. I'll actually just even give you that hint now. Anything really boasting to boost your testosterone to like a meaningful level that's not your sleep, weight training, lifestyle, or anabolic steroids probably is lying to you, right? Not really anything outside of those 4 pieces that can really make a meaningful dent. So fat loss and metabolism, better recovery and performance, which actually putting this outline together completely changed my view on this topic. And then the enhancing of mood and cognition. Those are the 3 realms that benefits usually sit in for these. And I think
I'm so excited. I think that there's a lot here that I feel like I know a lot about, but then also I just have so many questions. I want to start with the metabolism and fat loss piece. Yeah. This is what I've been seeing the most on social media. You see a lot of this, it increases the brown fat burning. Mm-hmm. Is that it? It increases how much brown fat, or it activates your brown fat, which people always automatically assume anytime you're talking about fat burning, that means fat loss. So right away, that is like a word and it's instantly viral. So I want you to talk a little bit about that piece. How does a cold plunge affect your metabolism and or fat loss, if at all?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest claim that I see is the fat loss and the metabolism piece and the brown fat, brown adipose tissue, which you're right. That's kind of like a new trigger word.
Yeah.
It can increase your brown fat. I don't know what that is, but I'm in. Like, that's what most people kind of see it as. Yeah. That's what we should put on a freaking t-shirt. Mechanism doesn't equal outcome. This is another one of those talks where it's like the mechanism makes sense, but the outcome in humans, it just doesn't really click. And if you guys haven't heard us talk about the whole mechanism versus outcome thing, it's where you take a mechanism. I think a good example is insulin with fat loss.
Yeah.
Right. It's a known fact when insulin increases in your body, you stop burning fat momentarily while insulin is raised up. And then when it comes back down to baseline, you presume like normal. So the idea of like keto or low carb is, if we take out carbohydrates, which is the main culprit of raising insulin, and we keep our insulin level low all day, we're not going to be storing fat. We're going to be burning it all day. So we're going to lose fat better. That's the mechanism. The outcome is like, okay, let's observe this in humans. Let's test it on people. Mm-hmm. And whenever you do it, a high carb versus a low carb group for weight loss, if they're at the identical calorie deficit, they lose the same exact amount of body fat. So the mechanism does not translate over to the real world. Yeah. And that's exactly what's happening over here. Now, 3 reactions, or these are the mechanisms, do take place when we see changes in metabolism. Is 1, insulation starts to occur, right? Your body starts to take blood flow away from your extremities, your fingers, your hands, your feet, to surround your internal organs. That does take place. Metabolic changes also come from just the fact that your body is needing to generate heat, which that actually does, when you're actually generating the heat, burn a substantial amount of calories. I know we've talked about Michael Phelps eating 10 to 12,000 calories a day while swimming. 6 to 8 hours is 1, because he's moving for 6 to 8 hours, but 2, because there's that heat transfer going on between him and the pool. Yeah. But if you're in an ice bath for 2 to 3 minutes, you might see a little spike, which is pretty much nothing. Now, the third is what you talked about, that brown fat or brown adipose tissue, which the first time people learn about this, I feel like they freak out and they're like, oh my God, this is the secret that's been missing my whole life. You have brown adipose tissue and white adipose tissue. So brown fat and white fat is usually what people do this. And white fat is what people say is the bad fat. And brown fat is the magic fat that accelerates how many calories you're burning, because it burns more calories at rest and things like this, which when you're in the ice bath, it does increase conversion from white into brown fat. But I think we got to bring this back. It's not significant. It's not significant at all.
And this is the piece that I feel like I really have dove so deep into, because again, metabolism, that's what I spent 6 years studying in my brain in school. And a lot of the study of metabolism is heat conversion, heat transfer. Like brown fat, I think, to put this into perspective, is babies have the most brown fat. Babies are chunky, they're really warm, their like rolls are perfectly smooth. That is brown fat. And it's because they don't have much surface area to generate heat. They need to keep themselves warm. And that's what it does. It helps keep these babies warm. That is what brown fat is. And because it generates a lot of heat, yes, that means that you are burning more fat to generate that heat. That doesn't mean that you're losing that fat to generate the heat. That just comes down to, I hate being that, I'm going to be that guy right now, but that comes down to calories in, calories out, total daily energy expenditure, being in an energy deficit will help you lose fat. I know that you guys have heard this a million times, but just because fat is the primary energy source versus carbohydrates. And yes, that burning idea, one that was just coined by society. It's oxidation is what it's called. Yeah. That just means you're using more fat for energy versus carbohydrates. It's like total miscommunication.
Total swing and a miss by the communication department. So people are like, it increases your conversion to brown fat, which burns more calories at rest, means that you're going to melt fat all day long. It's like, okay, you're skipping a few steps there, partner, whoever is explaining that. Now, brown fat, it's higher in babies. I think it gets up to, I think what I was looking at number wise was around 5 to 7% of total fat in babies is brown, where in adults, it's closer to 2 to 3% of your total fat storage, even at the higher end, like 2 to 3%. Is made up of brown fat. So even if you increase 2 to 2.5, which that's not going to happen from just taking a few ice baths. Even if you did that, there is zero significant difference that you're going to notice. Yeah. Congratulations. You get to eat 9 more calories today or whatever it might be that does it. That's probably the biggest myth we got to dispel when it comes to ice baths. They do not really improve your metabolism overall. They don't. They help those systems work smoothly, but you're not going to significantly increase how many calories you're burning. You're not going to increase your fat loss. You're not going to see that from cold immersion. That's just it. Like period, side eye.
Yeah. Your body's doing. So what it does is it actually activates brown fat. What Tony said, to a very small degree. You don't have much brown fat. So it's not anything that would be effective at helping you lose fat. If you're just thinking about it normally, this is exactly what should happen. You should activate more brown fat because you're in a very, very cold environment. Your body's like, oh, fuck, I'm going to die. I'm going to freeze to death. If you're thinking of it at the most baseline level, if you don't want to throw any science, just a little bit of logic here. Of course, you're going to activate the brown fat because it's better at releasing heat. So it's going to keep you warmer. It's just an adaptive response that our body is doing. So yes, it's going to activate brown fat. It's not going to change your metabolism. It's not going to make you burn more fat in the form of losing it. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. And there's benefits and pros and cons to everything, especially when it comes to ice. But when it comes to metabolism, that's pretty much just where it ends, right? That's just what it is. Hate to break you the bad news.
And that's the piece where I feel like it's a little bit easier to dispel now because, again, this narrative goes around so often with the fat burning, that misconception. But I feel like that's a little bit easier to tap in. If someone's heard it before, it starts to become more familiar. But then getting into the next piece of this potential benefit, and this is one that I'm curious about because I feel like forever I've always thought that, this may be helpful for recovery and soreness just because you're so used to seeing athletes in an ice bath. I even in college, when I worked with athletes, always going into an ice bath. So it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Maybe helps with some inflammation, maybe helps you recover a little bit faster. I know you mentioned earlier that there were some surprising pieces here.
Yes.
Are ice baths good for recovery and muscle soreness at all?
Now, and I think this is really cool. Alan Aragon, who we had on the podcast a few weeks, he's actually done quite a bit of reviewing this literature as well and helped point me in the right few directions to start looking at, because of course I'm with you. I'm like, okay, if there's any real benefit to ice baths, it could be cognition and recovery. It has to be, right? I almost didn't even question it. And here's the aspect that's kind of surprising, but it's important to note, is papers in this area lack a placebo control aspect, which when I first saw that, I was like, well, duh. I'm like, how do you placebo control for putting someone in a freezing cold body of water? You know, and this is something that we talk.
You don't put the other group in a body of water.
But that's not the placebo part, right? Because they can tell that they're not there. So here's what they've done. And there's been several papers that started to do this. Okay. It's several that started to do this because when you compare ice baths to non-ice baths in recovery, you'd see a significant improvement in muscle soreness in the 24, 48, and 36 hour mark after training. You would see improvements in the ice bath group versus not. But the question is to ask, okay, how do we know the placebo effect's not taking control here? And a couple papers were like, okay, let's just test this out. Let's see what we can do. Now, there was a couple papers, but this one from researchers at the Victoria University in Melbourne, they actually put a placebo group, and they put the placebo group in a 94-degree water tub. And they deceived them just telling them, hey, you're about to get into a 50-degree cold bath. But they put them in a 94-degree room temperature water immersion tank. They had one group that they actually put in a cold water tank at 50 degrees, one group in a 94-degree tank that was told 50 degrees, and one group that was in that same 94-degree tank, but was just told it was a warm tank. They were the control group. Now,
that's so smart. Sorry.
They did that, and I was like, that's still such a big gap. And I'm like, there's no way this could actually pan out. But ratings of pain and soreness, readiness to exercise, and estimated strength, in asking them how well they think they could perform after they do this, were all significantly impaired in the control group, the people that were in the 94-degree tank that were told it was 94 degrees, compared to both the cold and placebo, which saw equal rating improvements. In the placebo group that was actually in the 94-degree tank that was told it was 50, and the actual 50-degree tank, they both saw equivalent improvements. So I was like, wait a second here. And so they're starting to say, okay, there is a placebo. They can't say for certain if it's all placebo or not, but they can start to say, okay, there probably is a little placebo effect that does impact this. There is a lot of things, but there's a little bit of a placebo effect going on.
Yeah, this is actually so relevant I just got a comment today, and for whatever reason, I read so many comments on TikTok every single day, but this one really stuck with me, and I was just dispelling some sort of myth, whatever, it doesn't matter. And someone commented, how come all of these people will say that this works? Example, going into an ice bath. Why will people say, like, how come people do that? And this is, again, a small study, but this is so commonplace. When you believe something to be true, you have read up on doing cold baths, and now you have a reason for going in one. Like, you already have that, I think this works, in the back of my head. And that influences an experience. If you genuinely believe something to be true or not true, that influences your interpretation of an outcome of a behavior. I love this. Sorry.
It's something that, I don't know about you, but I just never questioned that aspect when you look at this kind of research. Because in my head, I was just like, oh, there's just no real way to really do it. I never thought twice about it. So I thought that was such an interesting concept. And that's when it comes to muscle soreness. Well, here's where the big piece comes in, is let's talk about the difference between ice baths and recovery post endurance training and post weight training, and its effect on muscle growth, hypertrophy, and strength. And this is what kind of jumped out, which I had heard speculation before, but when I actually got to dig into the literature, it surprised me, but it makes sense, because cold baths are really good at doing one thing, reducing inflammation. They're really good at reducing inflammation. That's a fact. But what is one of the most inflammatory causing activities that you can do to intentionally increase inflammation?
Weightlifting? Exercising?
It's weightlifting.
Weightlifting.
Yes, it's exercising. That's why that bothers me so much when people the fearmonger of anything inflammation is bad. Every disease is caused by inflammation. It's like, do you know what the most inflammatory thing you can do to your body is? To lift weights. Are you saying that's bad for me?
So this was my first initial thought. I was with you. I was like, oh, it does make sense that this is going to help with inflammation. But then you think of it as at a broader scale, are these studies and research mostly looking into post-exercise, post-workout inflammation that is temporary, that does go down anyway? Does it just speed up the reduction in inflammation that is around?
Yeah, so that's what it essentially helps reduce inflammation pretty immediate in post. So if you have that inflammation, which again, especially when it comes from endurance, it's one thing because you're not actually breaking down and damaging muscle tissue to that scale as weight training does. But inflammation is there for a reason. And that's the same thing when people demonize cortisol. Cortisol has a massive purpose in the body. You would not be in a good place if you didn't have it. Same thing with inflammation. It plays a really big role in certain functions, especially for repairing your muscle tissue. Your muscle needs nutrients brought to it in blood to repair and recover properly. So if you reduce that inflammation, you reduce the blood flow, do you think that's going to help or hurt your recovery process when it comes to rebuilding muscle? Because a lot of the research was done in soreness, but not about long-term signaling. And it also suppresses something called mTOR or mTOR signaling, which is essential for building larger muscle fiber. Now, here's a cool piece of research I want to pull out, because this is more of a newer area when it comes to the ice bath and sauna research. But from the University of Queensland, they found that 2 10-minute ice baths per week for 3 months reduced muscle gain by about 0.5 pound and reduced leg press strength by about 150 pounds over the course of the study compared to the control group who did not do an ice bath. Okay, so a 0.5 pound of muscle and a 150 pound decrease in strength or not decrease in strength, but less of an increase in strength over the course of that 3-month study. And another paper published in the Journal of Physiology found that cold water therapy, when compared to a 10-minute active recovery group, so this was just in the form of cycling post-exercise, like a 10-minute cycle post-weight training session, the active recovery group saw more muscle mass and strength, more anabolic signaling, an increase in satellite cells, and number in myonuclei compared to the cold water group. And they concluded, and I just put this excerpt in here, we found that cold water immersion after training substantially attenuated or reduced long-term gains in muscle mass and strength, significantly decreased that. So when we think of it's good for recovery, it's like, okay, from more endurance, which you might see that, which we'll go into a little bit. But when it comes to growing muscle, this can severely suppress how much muscle and strength you can build over time, which I don't think many people think of or make that difference.
No. You know, what's funny? I didn't think about it either. It's just something that so many people do. And especially if you're looking at top tier athletes doing this, that's not going to be a thought. You're not going to think about that potential, because why would the best of the best be doing that? And
100%.
Again, this isn't for your average. This is not, this isn't research looking at the most elite athletes and how it's going to affect them. Like, you shouldn't be comparing. That might be the first problem is,
me and LeBron, we're not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I thought that was super interesting because, you see the top level athletes and you're like, okay, if they do it to recover, so should I. And this is where there is a little bit of back and forth in the research of where it might have a potential benefit for recovery is specifically on, and they tested these in high level athletes in cycling and sprinting competitions, but you only saw a benefit on the actual race days or between back to back to back race days, but zero benefit or less of one in off season or building up to the actual competition.
Yeah.
So unless it was actual competition days, you didn't see any difference in that. So that might make sense where you're looking at like an NBA player who's also not going to be, especially during their season, they're not trying to put on mass. They're training, they're doing a lot of cardio, a lot of endurance. They are lifting weights, but more to maintain. They're not trying to bulk or build mass. So that's where if you're performing at that high level every 1, 2, or 3 nights, you might see that small benefit.
Yeah.
Which that one I think surprised me the most is the recovery piece of this. That's the one that I had almost thought for certain would be a huge, massive confirmed benefit.
I just thought about this while you were talking about this too. I wanted to make this clear difference here. We're talking about water immersion therapy. Okay. We're not talking about, in case anyone was thinking about this, well, why do people tell me to ice if I have like a sore ankle after playing basketball? That doesn't work? No, we're not talking about an injury and icing the spot, because putting cold on swelling, it does help reduce the swelling and the instant inflammation. And then again, it's why they say to do it every 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off, because it comes back. Like, it's not curing anything. It's just keeping the swelling at bay. So we're not talking about that. If anyone was thinking, oh, well, there's no need for me to ice if I have a soft tissue injury, we're not talking about that. That was like the exercise science brain
phenomenal,
in me.
Phenomenal point out there, because you're totally right. Because it's excellent at reducing inflammation.
Yeah.
Which in those scenarios is a great thing. But when you're trying to build muscle, not a good thing. So that was, I legit would not have even thought of that. That's a good point. That's where sauna and ice baths actually had the biggest difference, is what I learned in performance and recovery, which we'll talk about once we get to saunas.
Interesting.
That was a big one.
The next one, I'm really interested. I'm going to segue into this with a personal story, because I have really bad anxiety and I have PTSD. So when I would have panic attacks when I was younger, my mom used to shove, it was with my permission. Okay. It was the only thing that would get me to calm down. But she used to put my head in a big bowl of ice water, and to calm me. It was the only thing that could calm me down. And again, it's one of those things, I've been doing it since I was little. I still do it now, regardless of if there's any research that it works or not. It's more so just a behavior. It's now a response to get me out of that. My body has adapted. I know what to do now, but people say that this cold may help with your mood, may help with your cognition. It may, but I think it's funny because this is just, I always thought it was just a silly thing I used to do. And my mom used to just get me to do it to calm down. And I've just been, now it's a behavior I do. And I know a lot of other people also do that as well. But over the long term, is there any effect of having this cold water immersion over time on your mood, cognition, focus.
Yeah. Well, and I think
that.
that's the powerful piece, because I'm going to guess, because I actually haven't done that similar piece of it. But as soon as I hopped in the cold bath, or as soon as I do a cold shower, it is an instant change. I was like, do you notice when you put
It's
it in,
shocking.
does it just yank you out of
Yeah.
whatever you're feeling in the moment?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, this isn't even my whole body. It's just my head. It's like the opposite.
Yeah. It's,
But-
yeah. But it's crazy. But this is where I think for cold therapy in the form of even showers and ice baths, this is where you really see some potential. And honestly, and this is hard to look at in an evidence-based perspective, but before we jump into that piece on like the neurological level, I do think there is something to be said for just doing something that is really hard. Like making yourself do something that is, you can't make that easy. Like I've been taking cold shower finishes or complete cold showers every morning for the last year. Every time before I'm about to do it, I'm like, curse a little bit. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I do not want to. And it's been a year. It doesn't get better. It doesn't get better. But I think there's something to be said about that when you make yourself do hard things, even just from like a confidence perspective. Because when you do it and you get through it, you're like, okay, that's proof that I'm a strong individual, because that was a hard thing. It takes someone strong to do hard things. It's proof. I just did that. Where I think a lot of times, because I know this is a total off topic and might be a rabbit hole, but it's one of those things where it's that whole like I know it's important to like have really good self-talk, to talk yourself up and all that positive self-talk, and be like, you know what, you're strong, you're confident, and telling yourself this, right? You're strong, you're confident, you're capable, you're really smart, you do all these things. But for me, if I don't have action to back that up and be like, there's proof, yes, I am strong, I'm confident, stuff like that, I don't believe it. If I'm just laying in my bed on TikTok all day and I'm telling myself I'm productive, I do not buy it for a second. But when you stack up those hard things in building a business, like with the podcast, when you do these hard things and you get through, you're like, I don't think anything boosts my own confidence than doing those hard things. And I think that's worth something to be said, you know?
Yeah. It's also helpful, like when you're in the middle of something difficult, to have something in your back pocket of like, well, I did this. I've been able to do something that I used to find very difficult, and now it's become habitual that I do and I get myself to do every single day. If you're in a new circumstance that may make you feel similar, like it can help you feel motivated to accomplish something. I think about that with the podcast all the time. Like once I start, Tony and I do it all the time to ourselves. I think it's just the entrepreneur trap, but comparing yourself to other people all the time of and where you're at and all the things you need to do to be better. And then you just simply, to take myself back, I'll be like, where was I this time last year? What were we able to accomplish between now and then that was really hard, and a lot of things we didn't want to do. Yeah. That is something, I said it at the beginning about going into the ocean in the morning. If you are someone that just the act of doing that every single day, that makes me look at you and I appreciate it. I think that that's awesome. That is difficult. And
that says a lot about it, especially the ocean part.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
I liked that rabbit hole because I don't want to completely shit over someone's routine if this is something they have in their routine that just genuinely they like, and they don't care if there's any evidence that
that's what I'm saying. And we're going to go in because there's actually a big change that happens neurologically that we're not going to go too deep into the weeds because we're not neuroscientists, but there's actually some pretty massive changes that happen in the brain. But even if that didn't happen, I still would take cold showers because I feel great afterwards. Problems seem to shrink in size the rest of the day. It's a great thing. But changes actually take place on a neurological level. And more specifically, and this is the research that we pulled, I know Andrew Huberman has talked a lot about this, but I wanted to see the actual papers because we know sometimes you can exaggerate the truth. Sometimes we still love him, but that's what happens. Yeah. But the numbers is what I wanted to see. And at a neurological level, you actually see a pretty stark increase in the neurotransmitters epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, and the hormone cortisol as you go through these cold water immersions. All of these are linked to increases in alertness, focus, usually just because of that fight or flight response, which makes sense. And I'm wondering if that's what, like when you put your face in the ice bowl, if it stimulates a little fight or flight where it's like, okay, all these other things don't matter. We need to like hone in and close off everything externally. I feel like that would be a big piece of it that might help with anxiety. Do you think?
Especially with a panic attack or an anxiety attack, you're in fight or flight.
Okay.
So I wonder if it's just how you direct what you're perceived. I personally think it's the perceived threat changes. So now you have a new
that makes more
immediate
sense.
perceived threat versus it like when I'm thinking about the same thing over and over again, or really worried about something that hasn't happened yet. Like you have one thought to think about at that moment and it's being really cold. That's the new perceived threat versus something that has.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Which it does, because that's the same in the cold shower. You can't think of anything. The cold bath, you just can't. Your brain's like, hey.
Are these increases just short term, long term? Like how much cold therapy did you have to do?
I think here's the tough part about saying specifically how long it lasts and how large of an increase, because I really think the individual variance is going to matter a lot.
Your baseline matters,
Your baseline matters a lot. And I think this is the focus. And I think this is where I get it from in the morning, is that focus. And that's why I do it, is because I feel really calm and collected and really focused in the morning after a shower. And it's kind of interesting because ADHD medications like Adderall, Vyvanse, these all mainly work by increasing dopamine and norepinephrine. So it's starting to make sense a little bit. And we'll talk about dopamine here next, but this specific piece of research, and this was done, and keep this in mind, with intermittent exposure and the water temperature being set to 57 degrees. But the intermittent exposure was well over 10 minutes. But you saw a 20% increase in cortisol before to after. This was not in a follow-up, but before to after the immediate cold. You saw a 91% increase in epinephrine and a over 500% increase in norepinephrine pre to post cold therapy.
Who was this in? Was this in people?
This was in younger, healthy men. This particular piece of research was in younger, healthy men. Mm-hmm. And again, they didn't do a follow-up. And I know there's been speculation of how long it can raise your baseline. And that's where I just think it's going to depend on the individual. But from what researchers have spoken about, and this is not what I'm saying or claiming, but from what I've observed from people who have spent a lot more time here than I have, is that it's not an immediate reduction as soon as you get out. But the increases in these neurotransmitters do seem to last longer than just when you're doing it. Now, to the effect of hours, days, minutes, that's where I don't think you can confidently say this is how long it will last.
Yeah.
But it seems to last much longer than just when you're in it. Now, dopamine, this particular study did not test for, but another one, luckily, did. And I think this is the one I love and am fascinated about this, where I know a lot of, like, Robert Sapolsky talks about this quite a bit in several of his books. And Huberman actually did a really phenomenal. Did you listen to the dopamine episode he did?
Well, I saw a clip about him talking about, I think it was about like how artificial dopamine increases is one of like the worst things for you. And me with my severe ADHD can't listen to that because I am very susceptible. That's something, if taking my ADHD medication is something that I will always kind of be like, oof, I don't like that I do that for whatever reason. But it makes me able to function. But I will go periods if someone I respect who's well educated is like, I'll get it in my head that I should stop taking it and I'm fine without it. And so I did not listen to that episode because I knew I would just be like, oh, gonna stop taking it.
Well, and he didn't just absolutely poop on it, especially he does make a separation between like just normal individuals taking ADHD medication and individuals with ADHD or ADD, which I think is cool. And I honestly, that's one of my favorite. If someone wants an introduction to Huberman, I always recommend that episode because the way he communicates and explains it is super, super well. It was done, like, I think it was over a year ago. But
he is quite literally the dopamine guy. Like whenever I think about him, I'm like, want to learn about dopamine? Go to him.
And that is his circle of competence. Like that is what he has studied, tested his entire life. And that's where I think a lot of the claims for him that do get stretched a little bit are more in ranges outside of his circle of competence, like in the fitness or nutrition realm where he hasn't spent much time in. But that I think that's a cool recommendation if you've never or wanted an intro to that. That's one piece he did really, really well. But researchers out of Charles University in Prague, they wanted to test on dopamine, and they did actually notice, and this is again big nuance, a 250% increase in plasma dopamine in young men. But this was after a 1 hour cold water session at 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't know how these people did not die.
Fall off?
I don't know. But and 57 is warmer, a lot warmer, like than the 40 to 45, 50 range. That 7 degrees makes a big difference, but still. This is not after a 30-second cold shower finish after you've been in the water. So that's something I think people are like, oh, I take a cold shower. It increases my dopamine by 2.5 fold or by 250%. Can't quite say that. I think that's the big distinction there. But you do seem to see a big increase in focus, in cognition, and alertness following these. So I think that's one very practical use of cold. And I think when we want to dial it down to like protocols of like, how can you actually use this? Is it worth buying an $11,000 tub for your house?
No.
I mean, unless your money is not an object to you. If money's not a thing, sure. But for most people, I definitely just don't see this being a practical tool. It's not going to improve your like body composition, your body fat, your metabolism to a meaningful degree. It's not going to improve your recovery or performance. It will have an impact on your cognition and maybe your motivation, your confidence, things like that. So I guess it's really how much do you benefit that? But even I think you'll really notice a big difference in even just implementing cold water through showers. And I think the cool thing is, and I think this is where the degree varies, not just based on the temperature given, but how that temperature feels to someone. Because the feeling going into it is a big piece of it. You know, you should base it off of your feeling. How should you feel when you're going into it is more like you want to get out. You have an immediate thought of, I want to leave this, but not like a danger of, I can't feel my fingers, my feet are numb. Don't stay in after it's like an actual immediate danger, but it should be that little sweet zone of coldness. So when you first start, that's probably going to be warmer than someone who's been doing it a year, which you might need to get colder and colder to elicit that same response.
Yeah.
And I think even, and this is just whenever you want it from the cognition or confidence standpoint, it's just increase from where you're at. If you've never done this before in your life, should you start doing hour-long cold bath sessions? Probably not.
No.
Probably not. But if you want to test it out, try a 30-second, 45-second, turn your water down as cold as it can in the shower after it's been warm and you're done with everything tomorrow morning. And that's even honestly, if you've ever done like a 30, 45-second cold shower finish, the first time you do it, that is the longest 30 seconds of your entire life. I promise you that. But that would be something I think if you want the cognition, the mood, the focus enhancements, I'm a big advocate of it. And even if it is a little bit of placebo going into it too, you see some pretty big neurological changes, which I think is super cool. But that's essentially summing up where we're at now with the research on ice baths and cold therapy, which I don't know about you, but to me, it was like a little underwhelming when putting all of it together.
My expectations were to be underwhelmed because I personally view it as something that now more influential, wealthy people can flex to each other that they have a bath. And it's like anything, any trend that you think of that the majority of people can't get their hands on. Ooh, like, is this what, like, why do they have this? Like, what's so special about it? And then eventually there is going to be a cheaper version. Eventually it's going to be commonplace for the middle class to have their hands on cold baths one day, and no one's going to want it anymore. It's just like any cycle. But that there were things that I was really surprised about, like with recovery, like with inflammation. So I do think it's fascinating. I hope this helps some people who have been seeing a lot of these buzzwords.
Especially, I think the soreness part where people are like, they do it because they promise on the soreness. Any study that had tested an active recovery, like a short 10-minute active recovery session after your workout, outperformed cold therapy every single time. A small active recovery post-workout. We talked about this in the last research review, the AMA episode, actually, in when cardio can be useful for muscle growth, for things like that. If you experience a lot of soreness, get on the cycle, get on something small, get your blood pumping 10 minutes after your session. And I promise you'll notice such a big difference.
Incorporate yoga like once or twice a week.
That's the hardest workout I've ever done in my entire life.
Like, and the mental benefits of that. Like there's so many things you can't control for too, in terms of how many other factors, like this is something you guys really need to think about. All the other factors that influence how you recover. One of the biggest being sleep and nutrition. You've got to talk about all points if you're going to make that bold of a claim and isolate one behavior and say X causes Y. So
100%. That's always a good. I haven't even said that yet. I feel like that's something we usually do. So good slide in.
Yeah, I'm here.
Now, I was going to say, so the ice baths kind of underwhelmed me because I liked doing the cold water. I like that stuff and I'll continue to do it. But it underwhelmed me because I thought there was going to be something bigger there. The sauna actually outperformed my expectations a little bit. I think I was expecting cold baths to be a lot more impactful than saunas and heat therapy, but saunas actually,
I feel like it's been around. Has heat therapy been studied longer? then?
So it's been around for literal centuries, like people dating back thousands of years doing it. But the studies do go back, I think in the 60s are when studies started to pop up, which, yeah, so much longer than cold therapy. But just because people have been doing this, I mean, different cultures have been doing this for so long, for centuries before, just because they noticed a difference. And I will say shout out to, we haven't talked about her all too much on the show, but Dr. Rhonda Patrick has done a really,
she's wonderful,
an overwhelming amount of research when it comes to sauna, health span, lifespan, and these benefits. So I know she's on Found My Fitness. She has a podcast. She's done some other great ones. I'd say go check her out if you really want to dig deep into the weeds with this stuff, like stuff that might go over a lot of people's heads, but she is also a good resource. Now, the proposed benefits overlap a little bit, like we talked about. There's fat loss, there's improved cognition, there's better recovery and performance. Some of the other benefits here go with detoxing. You and I both love that word. It's just detox. You know, I
made a TikTok on detoxing today. Yeah, it pisses me off.
Wait, did you post it? I didn't even see it.
Yeah, it's doing well.
Okay, she's doing numbers. She's doing numbers today.
Good feedback too, which I like. I lately have been going to my comments and people have been nice. That's nice.
Shocking when it comes to you, because detoxing, we're not going to spend too much time on just because it's not like, I'll have you cover that piece real quick once we go into it. But detoxing, an increase in growth hormone is one of the most common clips and claims that I see people with the sauna. And then improving blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. Those are the proposed benefits here. And most of them overlap with cold, but there are some big differences. Now, before we jump into them, this is, again, when you look at the research, a lot of this is done in Finland, actually. Iceland and Finland is where they do most of this research. But,
I did research in Iceland, fun fact, in undergrad.
Like, you went to Iceland?
You know this.
I do not know this.
Yeah.
I do not know this.
We studied the effects of the thermal hot springs on depression and...
Your body lived in Iceland. I did not know that.
Yeah. They have a holistic rehab center there that you get a prescription from your doctor that you give to your boss and say, hey, I'm going here for 2 months. It's all paid for. Iceland's very small.
That's so sick.
But yeah, the thermal hot springs there are studied immensely. It's the best place to study them.
That's so dope. I learned something new today.
Yeah.
I learned something new today. But most of the research is done over there. And I think this is, again, the same protocol issue that some people like to stretch out, is when we're talking about these benefits come from people who are spending usually very long periods of time in these saunas very frequently through the week. And these sauna temperatures in most research span from 190 to 212 plus degrees Fahrenheit, even upwards, I think, 222 or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which is where these things span. And I don't know if you've ever gone to a 24-hour fitness, an LA Fitness, whatever your local gym is. And I've worked in gyms and been in gyms most of my life. Is the saunas in there reach maybe 150 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So much, much, much cooler than the ones used in this research. And I think that's a big, big drawback, because you can't quite say that'll transfer with certainty.
Yeah.
You just can't. So that's the biggest piece. Now, where we want to go into, and let me just, I'll throw this one to you at detoxing, because I didn't even write a little excerpt on it. Can you explain just detoxing as a whole? And then that'll easily translate over to saunas.
Yeah. So, and this is a common one you see all the time. I do the sauna to detoxify my body, to sweat out. One I see is like sweating out heavy metals, absolute insanity. I've talked about this before, but your body has its own built-in. It's really cool. Actually, it's free. It comes with life, actually, its own built-in detoxification system. Your skin, your lungs, your liver, kidney, digestive system works around the clock to get rid of any potentially toxic substances. To improve that, the best thing you could do to improve the functioning of these organs is eat a well-balanced, nutritious diet, high in fruits, vegetables, whole grains. If those organs are functioning properly, there's nothing else that is going to detoxify your body. Nothing. It's quite literally impossible. If any of those organs didn't function properly, you would not be able to effectively remove toxins from your body, which you do that on a daily basis, and you would die. Again, it sounds drastic, but if these were not functioning, if your system wasn't properly eliminating waste, anything, you would quite literally die. So it sounds extreme, but it is idiotic, especially in the science community. You talk to any researcher who has spent time in the field of metabolism, honestly, any scientific field, laugh at the fact that our society has made up this idea that you can do something better than a system already does, was built to do. So you can't enhance that. Another thing you will see a lot of these influencers, celebrities, wellness gurus, they'll talk about something that they say, and I quote, gets rid of the toxins. I go in the sauna to flush out the toxins. It's always the toxins. It's not specific toxins.
Yes.
And something really important to think about there is if you can't say the exact toxin and the exact amount of that toxin that is potentially harmful, it's impossible to do a clinical study looking at whatever behavior it is that could effectively get rid of those toxins.
Yeah.
Because what are they? You need to know exactly which toxins they are and at what dose they're potentially harmful in order to research if celery juice, if a sauna is going to effectively get rid of them in humans. Yeah. Better than your kidney, liver, etc.
That's the biggest freaking, the same thing with we had on Alan with the seed oil conversation. Seed oils cause this. Which one? There are countless. Is it canola oil? Is it sesame? Is it just from nuts? Like which one? If someone's just saying toxins or seed oils, it's pretty apparent that they probably don't have the level of education to speak about what they're speaking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's just it. And the detox, that cracks me up because it's like, those are the things that work. And it's like, oh, well, what if they're not working correctly? That pill from Whole Foods for $50 that you're taking is not going to fix your kidneys. It's not going to
which toxin
damage.
And at what dose is this toxin potentially toxic in human beings? And how much of this behavior, like going in a sauna, do I need to do to get rid of these toxins, the exact ones at this exact dose? And is it effective? Tell me that. Bring me that, and then we can have a conversation.
We'll talk. You would reply to anything that actually was brought to you like that. But that's the thing; they never do. Yeah. Especially with toxins. That is the most blanket, but probably widely used one ever. So that's why we're not really spending too much time on detox in sauna, because it doesn't. If you go get wasted on tequila the night before and you go to detox the next morning, you're just sweating and rehydrating.
My favorite is the influencers that talk about like toxic foods, toxic skincare, toxic cleaning products, anything. And you'll see on their Instagram or on their TikTok, them going out drinking alcohol. Oh, you want to know what's toxic? That is my
favorite thing in the world.
Alcohol is actually...
What's actually toxic. Yeah, what's actually toxic is the alcohol you're drinking. Okay, that is one of the more funny hypocrisies that we see on there. So that's why we're not spending too much time. Now, when it comes to the performance and strength, this is where it actually surprised me. And I actually might start changing my own routine because of this. And I would usually just sauna after my workouts. I think a lot of people do that. But researchers in Spain tested something different. Now, hitting the sauna before lifting weights, not after, actually shows a pretty massive jump in strength during the workout immediately following. So researchers in Spain tested this. They separated trained and untrained individuals, so both trained and untrained individuals, into two separate groups. One group spending 12 minutes in the sauna directly before training, before they're training for their 1 rep max on the leg press. So one group spending 12 minutes in the sauna directly before training their 1 rep max on the leg press. Also, FYI, this was in a 212-degree sauna, which, again, most people here do not have access to that. But
sounds miserable.
There's case in point here. Them and a control group who did not spend time in a sauna. The untrained sauna group increased their 1 rep max by 39 kilograms, 85 pounds more than the control group over the course of the study. So an 85% increase in 1 rep max compared to the control group, where the trained sauna group increased their 1 rep max by 35 kilograms. Or sorry, it wasn't 35, I misspoke, by 25 kilograms, which is 55 more pounds than the control group, who barely saw improvements at all over the course of this study. So that actually shocked me, seeing that large of a jump, which I don't think is attenuated to specific metabolic changes going on in the sauna, but I'm going to guess probably just because of the actual fact that your body is now warm. There's blood flow to your muscles.
It's like
and
a warm-up.
Yeah, it's essentially like replacing a warm-up, which makes sense, but that's a pretty dang big jump. And not only when it comes to lifting weights, but when it comes to endurance athletes, right? They show an increase in speed at higher blood lactate concentrations, so faster speed. And these were actually saunas post-exercise and endurance athletes. But Not only that, improvements to time to exhaustion while running. So they could run longer. Their endurance was built up longer over the course while including post-training saunas. They saw an increase in VO2 max compared to control groups. So both in endurance and weight training, you're seeing some pretty big jumps in where this might actually improve your performance. To where I usually spend my warm-ups doing some more mobility focused and more targeting like the joints and range of motion that are going to be used that day. But I'm going to test out this sauna a little bit and try warming up in there, maybe doing the mobility exercises in the sauna before doing this. And afterwards, it looks like it has some effect on this too, which I think is pretty cool to look at, which I never heard of the pre-exercise sauna use.
Yeah, you do that. You report back to me. I will not be partaking. I hate saunas.
You're not a fan of the sauna.
But it does, I mean, at first I thought, I was like, that's crazy, but it does make sense seeing as you're increasing blood flow, increasing heart rate. It does make sense now that I think about it, but I feel so fatigued after a sauna. So I am kind of interested. I'm like, but I also panic in a sauna because I feel like I can't breathe. So let's not use me as an example.
Yeah. Which I think because I feel fatigued if I sit in there for like 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm just going until I'm dripping in sweat. But
yeah, but 212 degrees.
I'm like, I've never also been in a 212 degree sauna before. So there's that too. But it seems like a pretty big jump there. And it makes more sense on the endurance aspect because we're going to talk about the cardiovascular system there. And I'm guessing that's where the specific improvements in endurance athlete and training come from. Now, here's a cool intro to cardio that I do want to throw in that I was introduced to by Peter Attia, who actually had a new cool book that just dropped, big on longevity and lifespan. All right. But a cardio hack if you hate the stair climber or treadmills, which I do both. I'm not a big fan if it's not a competitive or sport. The cardio hack is what I'm going to call it because we're going to cardio stack here if you hate cardio or especially if you're just introducing cardio into your routine. If you've lifted weights and you're bulking and you're like, oh, I should probably do a little cardio for my heart and stuff. This would be a good way to stack it up. But essentially, if you hate spending longer times on the treads, on stairs, what you could do is you can get your heart rate and breathing up with, let's say, 8 to 10 minutes of stairs, of treadmills, of whatever, but 8 to 10 minutes. So a lot shorter duration on the piece of cardio. And then immediately before you let your heart rate or breathing dip, you immediately hit the sauna for an additional 10 to 15 minutes before letting your heart rate or breathing slow down. Because one thing that the sauna is excellent at is when you just go in there cold, it slowly increases your heart rate quite a bit. And that's where a lot of the cardiovascular and longevity standpoint, that aspect comes in. But if you already jump it up from a cardio session and you don't let it dip, and I've tested this several times over the last few weeks just with my Oura Ring, it will keep your heart rate elevated close to or to the level that you elevated it through cardio. So it's almost a form of isolated cardio where you don't have to do the thing you hate, but the heat keeps your heart rate and breathing up, working your cardiovascular system without you having to be miserable on the stair climber. And you could watch something cool like this podcast. You could watch something cool like this podcast while you're in the sauna too.
Can you bring a phone into the sauna?
Yeah, it'll overheat after about 20 minutes most of the time. So be careful in your AirPods too. But those old school AirPods could last like 45 minutes. Mine tap out at like 15 now in the heat. But this is not identical to if you were doing stairs or treadmill because you're not using the muscles to propel you and to use those exercises. But from just the standpoint of your cardiovascular system, this is a phenomenal way to add in extra cardio if you just hate it and trek along with it.
Yeah.
It's a huge kind of way to add in. So I even recommend if you're just getting into cardio or you hate it, play around with that and see if it accomplishes the same mission. Because I think that's a cool little way just from someone who, I don't know, I just can't get myself to. I'm not a runner like you. I can't do it.
I like movement keeps me sane. So but I do look at it from a strictly cardiovascular perspective. It is when you really think about it, that's pretty amazing that it can still keep you at the point of more higher intensity exercise, like staying on the Stairmaster. Like it could keep your heart there, keep you working as hard, but you're not moving. That's cool. I think that's cool.
I think it's the lazy man's cardio. The lazy man's cardio, which I think is kind of cool. So that's where it comes down to performance, training, and recovery there. But this all starts to now bleed into, and I'm sure people have heard of I think this is big on Rhonda and Huberman, the lifespan differences noticed, and this was more in Finland teams. So you might be aware of this piece. Have you recognized a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, I hear about it all the time. I have my thoughts.
I don't know how practical this really is. This was all research done in the University of Eastern Finland. So in the same population, which I know you and I have talked about and touched on before. It's a little note to put if all research surrounding one piece is coming from one strict population. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily always expand to everybody on the globe. But the research found that if you were to sauna 2 to 3 times per week through the week, in this population, you notice a 27% decrease in death from cardiovascular disease compared to just one sauna use per week. And if you were upping that to 4 to 7 times per week, you saw a 50% decrease in risk from cardiovascular disease compared to the 1 time per week group. So it seems like the more you do it, it's kind of dose dependent. The more you do it, the more your risk of cardiovascular disease and death from that decrease, which it makes sense with the big effect on blood pressure that we're going to go into and just cardiovascular health in general. What are your quarrels?
Well, I wonder if these people sedentary. Do we know that? Did they engage in any regular cardiovascular exercise at all before this?
So from what I had read in this particular one, I don't think, and I know because there's a lot of different research, especially in Finland and Iceland, about longevity, and especially that Huberman and Rhonda talk about. But in this particular one, they did not mention other forms of exercise, of weight training, of anything else, and we talk about how important control is in research. That is a big aspect where it's like, if you just have a question mark there, it's like, whoa, were these people also running outside every day? Were they lifting weights and running? What else? There's a big question mark there. And I don't know, I'm not familiar if that's with all research surrounding health span and lifespan, but in this one, it was a big question mark, which is something to think about.
That's something and again, the health span and lifespan is a field of research that is not my expertise, but it's also very complex. You have to consider
so many things.
There's so many different factors you have to consider, and it's really hard to do. That's why there's a lot more like mice rodent studies in the lifespan health span field, because it's easier
because you have to control for so much. It's like, okay, what are they sleeping like? What's their diet like? What's their trends? It's so many things it's hard to control for. Now, here's the one aspect of that where I think this is where you can look at the mechanism and maybe translate it. But something I found out really cool when I think I was talking about, I don't know if I was talking about this on the pod or on social media, but elevated blood pressure is fairly common in people who take ADHD medication, in type 1 and 2 diabetics, in people using hormone replacement therapy. It's common as you get older. And with a lot of different medications and lifestyles, elevated blood pressure, which is kind of a big deal. This is one of the leading markers for cardiovascular risk as you age. This is a big deal. And as a diabetic, I never had really thought about it, because whenever I'd go into the doctor, I'd be about 10 points above where I should be. And that was more in my systolic. My dystolic was fine. But still, I was always like, is that a problem? And the nurse would be like, oh, no, you're good. And the more I looked into it, I was like, well, wait a second. I'm like, I don't think this is good. They're like, yeah, it's probably just a fluke or whatever. I'm like, no, it's always up here. But this is where it looks like the saunas actually have a pretty big effect. Now, and for those who are unfamiliar, learning about what blood pressure is a little bit more, it's essentially measuring the pressure of force that the blood pressures out against the artery walls as the heart beats. And the cool piece is, and this is where you look at it, the sauna has actually been found to decrease both diastolic and systolic blood pressure, right? You have an upper and a lower number, by 7 to 10 points pre and post sauna. And if used repetitively, it seems like lasting effects in just systolic blood pressure, but still. And for those who are like, what the freak is the difference? Systolic is the pressure when the heart beats, and diastolic is where it's between beats, the pressure between beats. That's what those two numbers will mean.
Yeah. And to put this, just if this still sounds confusing, because it can be confusing. Yeah. But if you think about plaque formation or plaque buildup in the arteries, that's sometimes people can think of that word, oh, plaque, like I know that's bad. What may increase my risk for, why do some people have plaque buildup? And again, that can do with cholesterol. But if your blood pressure is high, you're decreasing blood flow towards the heart, away from the heart. So narrowing those blood vessels, because that's increased pressure, is a sign that you have narrow blood vessels. There's a little bit, the flow is not optimal of blood, and that's away from the heart towards the heart. And that can contribute to plaque buildup. Again, you don't have a wide enough range to move things through. If you think of a lot of people inside of a tunnel and like blood. So all these people in a tunnel trying to move through the tunnel to get out of it. if you have too many people in that tunnel, the pressure is going to increase and the movement is going to slow, kind of similar to traffic. And that's how plaque formation can develop. And plaque formation can lead to heart disease. Again, this is just one example, but it can kind of put that pressure piece. I feel like it is one of those markers that people sometimes ignore, even in the medical field. Be like, oh yeah, it's a little bit, whatever. But when you really think about it that way, it's like, my blood is moving through here. I want my blood to be able to flow in both directions very smoothly.
Yeah. And that's what blows my mind is even medical professionals kind of brush it off a little bit. But even if it's even just elevated by 5 to 10 points above where you should be, that 120/80 mark, that is a constant elevation in pressure through your entire body, 24 hours a day. And that can add up over the course of years. So it's something that you usually want to jump on early. And how saunas help with this, it helps in two manners, essentially. Is one, it causes blood vessels to dilate, and two, the artery walls to relax. So it also gives that relaxation to let them open up a little bit smoother, right? Less solid there, which is a huge piece. I think that's honestly one of the biggest benefits that I found from here, especially with how many people I don't think realize even just slightly elevated blood pressure levels can impact your long-term health. I think this is something huge that can, I mean, that's a significant difference. A 7 to 10 point drop.
That's huge. And I mean, we talk a lot about risk factors. We'll say a risk factor for heart disease, diabetes. I don't think we've ever thoroughly explained what that means, but this blood pressure is one of those risk factors, just one. You combine that with high cholesterol. Okay, now you've significantly increased your risk for that plaque buildup. You combine that with a sedentary lifestyle. That's another risk factor. You combine that with being clinically obese, another risk factor. It's not this is where this gets so convoluted. It's not one causing anything. Someone being obese does not cause high blood pressure. It could be a potential component. That's also why you'll see a lot of people who may seem to have more fat on their bodies have perfectly healthy blood biomarkers, and next to a very skinny person, they could have high blood pressure. It's just one small potential piece that is a risk factor. And I wanted to take the time to kind of explain that a little bit more, because it can put into perspective how complex disease development really is. And it's not just a matter of X causes Y, but there are key contributors. Yeah,
big time. That was a really well explained analogy, but it matters. And I was going to say, you can even buy a blood pressure cuff on Amazon for, I think, $35, which I have one, which I'll check. I used to check it every morning as I was trying to improve it, but as I got it under control, I now do it just about like once a week. But it's something that I think at least is worth investing in.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about what if a blood pressure cuff becomes a new blood glucose monitor?
Oh my gosh, the new wave of the continuous.
In theory, if you think about it, it's literally the same thing. It's not at all the same thing, but the behavior of monitoring
more important.
It is more important. Yeah, if you're going to monitor something, monitor your
freaking blood pressure, not your blood glucose if you're not diabetic or pre-diabetic. Okay, that's hilarious thought.
That's so funny. Imagine
it's $30. You don't have to spend hundreds of dollars.
Should we start a business?
I actually think we might have just scheduled a meeting right after we record. But I do think it's worth keeping around the house if you are someone who experiences even slightly elevated blood pressure. And that brings us really down to our last big piece that wraps us up, which is probably the one that takes social media by storm, which you said you hadn't seen too much on, right? When it comes to clips.
No, but it's funny because I only really see this type of stuff from what people tag me in, because this isn't my For You page. It's not my feed that I'm scrolling into, especially the bolder, outlandish things. That's really when I either see someone stitching in a response video or duetting something that is bullshit. That's when I'll see it, or when people tag me in videos. Yeah.
And this is where I'm maybe it's because I'm a guy too. So my page is more filled with more testosterone, growth hormone, just dude stuff, just dudes being guys. And here's where I think the clip comes from is Huberman came through this, and there was a research paper that was released, and this is a legitimate research paper that showed that sauna use, and we'll talk about how exaggerated this sauna use really is, how much it would take to see this, can elicit a 16-fold increase in growth hormone production. A 16-fold increase in growth hormone, which growth hormone, for those unfamiliar, very different from testosterone, but it's released in pulses, about 10 per day, and mostly coming in deep sleep. That's why deep sleep is so important for muscle and recovery. Deep sleep is where about 50 to 70% of total growth hormone is released throughout the day. Okay, it's released from your pituitary gland, and it tells your bones, muscles, and other organs and tissues to grow. Hence the name. by adding more cells. Now, what you typically see released in the course of a day is only 1 to 2 milligrams organically by your body. You see, and this is, and just to put this in perspective, a 16-fold increase is a 16-time increase, right? So we can say this up. It's about 160% increase is what that relates to. Now, deep sleep, for example, increases HGH by about 75%. You see a 75% spike during deep sleep. In fasted high-intensity exercise, you see anywhere between a 50 and 100% increase in growth hormone, especially throughout those pulses. And fasting, and this is more up to a 56-hour fast, so it's not really realistic, up to a 180% increase. So just to put it in perspective as far as how much the sauna can increase, it's not like it's this outlandish number that is so far ahead of anything natural that you can do, like sleep or high intensity training and things like that. That's the first piece of this.
Well, my face, if anyone's noticed my face this whole time, I'm confused because if that was really the case, you would look into this person having a disease called acromegaly. Is that what it's called?
Not familiar.
Acromegaly. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it's a hormonal disorder. And it's when your pituitary gland produces too much growth hormone during adulthood.
I was going to say, Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker, I think has had that.
Yeah, you may see people, if it happens in childhood, it leads to increased height. Like you see, this is literally a term, gigantism. So people who are extremely, extremely tall. And then if it happens in adulthood, that's when you'll see people's bones start to like spur out, be very, very large, disproportionate. So that's what I was thinking. I was like, wait, if that was actually the case, you would be tested for that.
Yeah, well, and that's you even see, and that's where it gets dangerous too, is people forget it increases its growth in muscle tissue, and your heart is a muscle. Yeah. And that's where it can get dangerous. As I know Tony Robbins has talked about that specific issue.
You have a very short lifespan is.
Yeah, and
your
large
life
heart too. So
expectancy.
it's not and that's also but at like extremely high levels in that where this isn't in a disorder level. That's what I'm saying. Like the 16-fold increase is not much more than fasting or high intensity exercise or even just simply sleeping. Okay, so, and this is where when people talk about the testosterone increases you get from this and the growth hormone increases you get from that, it's not enough to make a meaningful difference in your day-to-day life. You're not going to, if you start doing the sauna, get yoked out of your mind like a bodybuilder, because they're usually taking between 1 and 6 IU of HGH daily, which is up to the 100th power more than this would increase your growth hormone, right? So this is nothing close to what you'd even see. And even then, it's not like that compound alone is what bodybuilders are taking. They're stacking it with so many other things. And that's where, and this research was real. This research was very real. But just to lay this out, it was done in Finland, freaking shocking, right? But 2 20-minute sauna sessions at 176 degrees Fahrenheit, separated by a 30-minute cooling period, seemed to elevate growth hormone by 2-fold over baseline. So doubled over baseline. 2 15-minute sauna sessions, so shorter, at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, dry heat, separated by that same cooling period, increase in a 5-fold increase. And this is where the 16-fold comes from. 2 1-hour sauna sessions per day at 176 degrees Fahrenheit. I personally could not sit in there for 1 hour at a time, let alone twice back to back. For 7 days in a row is what exhibited this 16-fold increase in growth hormone. So I don't know about you, but most people talking about doing the sauna aren't spending 2 hours per day in consecutive days in the sauna. I think that's where the big, like, hey, the asterisk next to that 16-fold increase in growth hormone, I think that's where that comes from.
You know what I also wonder too is, I'm going to just be a little skeptic over here, is if how tall these people were. Because in Finland, I think they're ranked like 14 or 15 in terms of like the tallest countries in the world.
Really?
On average, their height is like between men and women is 5'8".
Oh, wow.
But yeah, taller people, you're going to produce more growth hormone.
Well, and this is an increase from their baseline. So not just like a total growth hormone secretion standpoint, but it would play a role too, which this was actually, I read through it. I don't remember them listing height. Yeah. Other health outcomes, but not height, which is interesting. But still, I mean, like to put it all in perspective, when you hear someone say a 16-fold increase in growth hormone, you're like, I need to do that. That's better than insane. Anabolic steroids. Yeah. And I'm here to say it's not realistic, because you're not going to be doing 2 1-hour sauna sessions per day every single day at that hot of a sauna. And two, even if you did see that large of an increase, they come out in pulses. This is not a 24/7 increase in growth hormone that's just going to be circulating through your body. It's an immediate pulse up. And then as soon as you're not doing a sauna, it's where'd it go? Back down.
Yeah.
It's not realistic. So that's where it comes from, sauna. So sauna overall, though, in performance, in recovery, in when it comes to blood pressure, cardiovascular health, longevity, there's a lot of data there.
Yeah.
Growth hormone, not enough to worry about, but saunas are really big there. And I think practical use would be insert this in your life when you can. Experiment with trying a 5, 10, 15-minute sauna. And if you're someone who just hates warming up because you roll into the bed super early or you're just a little lazy, I know I'm just not a big fan of like jumping on the treadmill for 10 minutes before I go lift weights. Try jumping in the sauna, see if that does the same for you, or try implementing that in the first place. And then, especially if you are someone who wants to just improve overall cardiovascular health, try and jump in there a few times per week, right? Try and end your sessions in there or throw it in after your cardio. Try and mix in 10 to 20 minutes post training or whenever you can. I think that has a lot more practical use than ice baths. And I do want to go over timing real quick because this is actually important before we wrap it up, is when and time of day best to do these. And this is something that's kind of interesting, but I think most people have heard the sense that when you're falling asleep at night, your body temperature drops about 1 to 3 degrees in order for you to fall asleep. And in the morning, part of your circadian rhythm that wakes you up is the 2 hours before you wake up naturally, is your temperature starts to increase 1 to 3 degrees back up to normal, right? So you see a little dip over bedtime. Now, we talked about the adaptive thermogenesis from the beginning. So if you're taking a cold ice bath, that means that what it's going to be doing is producing heat and warming your body up because you're putting yourself in that cold scenario. So that might not be the smartest thing to do before bed. Because if before bed, your body wants to be cooling down, but you're intentionally warming it up, that could really hurt you from falling asleep if you're not just freaking jacked and awake from the shock of it all. But that's another piece of it where saunas might be beneficial because you're intentionally heating the outside up, which is cooling your internal temperature. Your body's turning on all the mechanisms to cool, which is what it should be doing before bed anyway. So timing can very much matter in regards to sleep, at least, which we know how important that is. I think that's an important asterisk to mention is if you're doing ice baths right out of bed or sauna first thing in the morning, you might notice a little difference in your energy and fatigue.
Yeah. Also something, I wonder if researchers have ever considered this or if this would even matter, but it's just something I'm thinking about. Women's menstrual cycle, your internal body temperature sees stark fluctuations depending on with the stark hormone changes. So if you have stark increases in progesterone, drop in estrogen, so around ovulation, you'll see a spike in your internal body temperature.
Really?
That's why that's a form of birth control. That's the form of birth control I use. People have their skeptics, whatever, but take my body temperature every single morning. You could do it with the Oura Ring too. That's actually why I want one.
Yeah.
And over time, again, you have to be very consistent. And if you sleep off, you shouldn't report your temperature because sleep affects your internal body temperature. But you see these changes like 1 week you'll be around 95, 96, and then you're up to like 98, 99 around ovulation. So I wonder if that would...
That is interesting to say, like when you could maybe stack that.
Yeah.
And influence it, because that is that's one thing I'm a little jelly of. I was talking to Corinne about her getting one of these. It's a cool thing from the female aspect is it can even, they call it like period predict.
Yeah.
Because it can usually predict when exactly you're going to start your cycle because of those changes in temperature according to your rhythm.
Yeah.
That is really cool. I forgot about that. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. It makes
cool.
it really convenient. Any girls listening to this, if you're trying to go off the birth control because of all the shitty side effects, again, you have to be consistent about it. It's something I would recommend definitely if you have a consistent partner to monitor it with. But it can definitely be effective if you have a regular cycle. Again, if you don't have a regular cycle, it's not effective. But
or please sponsor.
Side note, sorry, that was complete off topic.
No, but it's super interesting when it comes to the fact of it, because if you're intentionally changing your temperature through ice or sauna, I wonder how that could influence anything else.
Girls are crazy. Our bodies are just magical.
It is. It's insane. It's freaking insane. But I think that wraps up our day with ice bath and sauna use. So if there's anything that we did not answer that you wanted us to go into, just let us know in the comments on Instagram, on anywhere else. You all know where to find us there. But I think that's a pretty big, I thought that was a good, for timing wise, that was a good review. That was a good review of both big topics.
That one. Hopefully we answered those questions. I've been getting them a lot. So now we'll have a place to revert to people to.
Jump over to our YouTube, our Instagram, our now Facebook, if you're doing that. And then again, everything important is in the show notes below. If you want to jump onto our weekly research review dropping every single Friday in the FS Premium, check that out. Legion, Strong Inside, everything else you need down below.